Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Link building and the classroom in the round. And we're very excited to show this off here this evening. Science is about the discovery of exploration. Really, I like to think of it as the search for better explanations. And there are two ways in which that's important. The first of those is the sort of the obvious way of the discovery of the explanation. But the second way is equally important, and a better explanation is only better if it can be communicated better, if it can be transmitted to other people in a better way. That's another way to have a better explanation. And our speaker tonight has been involved in science in both of those ways, both the discovery and the communication of better explanations. And by doing this, by teaching science, we're building a world where science can succeed for all of us. Thank you for joining the College of Science tonight to hear about educational STEM reform in our 2018 F.A. Gilfillan Memorial Lecture, Catalyzing the Transformation of Science Learning at OSU. The Gilfillan Lecture is a long-standing tradition in our college, which has brought us together for many years to celebrate outstanding science at Oregon State University in honor of Dr. Gilfillan, whose record of extraordinary science has impacted generations. I'm honored to introduce Dr. Manogue, recipient of the 2017 College of Science F.A. Gilfillan Memorial Award for Distinguished Scholarship. The award recognizes faculty in the College of Science who demonstrate a long and exceptional scientific career with nationally and globally recognized scholarly achievements. But first I want to welcome the Gilfillan family. Could everyone in the Gilfillan family stand up and be recognized? They're behind you. Behind me, okay. Nan, Bob Jensen, Tammy and Lionel Wood, John Doty and Amanda Doty, and Nan is the daughter of Doc Gilfillan, and Tammy and John are grandkids, so we're very happy to have them here. So this family established the Gilfillan Memorial Award to honor Doc Gilfillan. Everyone here called him Doc Gilfillan, who was the longest serving dean in Oregon State University history in the College of Science, almost 25 years, from 1938 to 1962, as well as acting president of OSU from 1941 to 1942. The gift of the Gilfillan family honors Doc Gilfillan's life and recognizes his extensive service and contributions to Oregon State University, to our college, and the field of pharmaceutical chemistry. He was an inspiration to faculty and students in the College of Science and at Oregon State University. Tonight, we gather together in the rich tradition of public engagement in science, and we're going to hear from Dr. Manogue in her talk, Catalyzing the Transformation of Science Learning at Oregon State University. She's going to take us through new ways of understanding physics and the path of educational transformation in STEM. I have to warn you, there's audience participation tonight, which I guess you may have picked up on by having to grab the whiteboards and the pens and so forth. And she's going to engage us in an active exploration of how physics and external representations can be used to understand concepts in physics. Dr. Manogue is highly skilled both in understanding quantum gravity, the theory of everything, and in physics education. Corinne is perhaps best known for her pioneering role in establishing and leading the Paradigms in Physics project established in 1996. I hear frequently as dean from students who have taken the Paradigms of Physics courses at OSU and we're blessed to have done that. In one of the grandest experiments in science education at OSU, the Paradigms Project overhauled and modernized our upper division physics curriculum to better reflect the ways in which physicists think about the field. And I think it also transformed the physics department into a department that is truly focused on student success. This method replaced traditional teaching with interactive and engaging methods to facilitate student learning and problem solving. It's been funded by 11 National Science Foundation awards since 1996, over 22 years. It totaled more than $2.8 million. And the project has really brought far-ranging changes to how physics is taught at OSU as well as nationally. People know about this project and the work that's been done here all over the United States and beyond. Corinne has distinguished herself in many ways. She arrived at OSU in 1987 as the first woman tenure-track assistant professor of physics. She and her husband, OSU mathematician Tavian Dre, were among the first dual hires at OSU. Manogue's arrival not only heralded the beginning of gender-inclusive hiring approaches to physical sciences at OSU, but led to modernizing the physics curriculum. Reform is not just a mission to Corinne, it's an intrinsic part of who she is, and it's reflective of her values. Leading curriculum and institutional change in learning appears to come naturally to her. She calls herself a child of all the big education reforms. In elementary school in Cincinnati, Corinne devoured the new math curriculum of the 1960s. In high school, she learned introductory physics based on new physics education materials produced at MIT. Corinne headed to Mount Holyoke, a women's college in Massachusetts, where she double majored in both math and physics. And she enrolled at Mount Holyoke primarily because the institution had graduated a large proportion of women in the STEM fields, more than any other college or university in the country at the time. And while there, her academic excellence impressed her professors so much, and she was persuaded to stay for an additional year after graduation to work with British cosmologist Dennis Sciama, who was the advisor for Stephen Hawking. So Corinne shares that in common with one of the world's great physicists as well. Not only did Corinne spend the year studying black holes, but she began a lifelong fascination with quantum gravity after Sciama shared a seminal paper with her on the subject. She's enthralled by the interplay of math and physics that was described in the article, and she pursued a graduate degree at the University of Texas at Austin. She specialized in field theory, in curved space, and pursued postdoc research at the Institute for Advanced Studies in Princeton, New Jersey, where she met Tavian Dre, her future spouse, and I learned tonight, at the time, collaborator. So that's a tricky way to start a marriage, as a collaborator. It's hard enough when you're not married to your collaborator. Corinne and Tavian have collaborated to develop curricular materials that provide students with a bridge between vector calculus and physics using differentials. Essentially, addressing the vector calculus gap between how vector calculus is usually taught by mathematicians and how it's taught by other scientists. Since joining our physics faculty more than 30 years ago, Corinne has received tremendous national recognition for her work on the Paradigms Project, which I mentioned earlier, to being elected a Fellow of the American Physical Society, to receiving the American Association of Physics Teachers Award for Excellence in Undergraduate Physics Teaching, and also being named to the Oregon Academy of Sciences as a 2016 Outstanding Educator in Science and Math in Higher Education. And Corinne has won basically all of the teaching awards here at OSU. There aren't really any more teaching awards to give her. We're probably going to have to come up with some new ones. Corinne's talk is extremely relevant today and comes at an opportune time when OSU is pursuing student success objectives that prioritize and balance inclusive excellence and educational support for all students. And the College of Science as well, in the same way, working to inspire confidence in science, not just among science students, but among all students. So let's hear what research in STEM education looks like and how education research faculty embedded in disciplinary departments can help enhance science education in the 21st century. Please join me in welcoming our 2018 Gilfillan Memorial Lecture speaker, Corinne Manogue.
Thank you. You may wonder why it is that I'm sitting in the audience and not coming up to the podium. And I'm going to give you an example that comes from a friend and colleague of mine, Joe Reddish at the University of Maryland, a physics education researcher, who talks about how we signal what it is that we understand about what it is that we're expected to do. And the example that he gives is you walk into a restaurant, and if the menu is in a folder, then you know that you should first sit down and then order, and then you eat with a knife and fork and then you pay. But if you walk into the restaurant and the menu is on the wall, you order first and then you pay and then you sit down and then you eat with your hands. Yes. So, Tevian and I have a variant of this story. When we were first married, we spent some time in India, a culture very different from our own. And we were at a small town and we went into a working man's restaurant and there was no menu. And gradually we came to understand that we should sit down and we should not order because it was all you can eat. They came and they just put little piles of different kinds of food on our plates. And I always like to save the thing I like to eat best for last. And so I took a little taste of everything, and the thing I liked the least, I ate up, and then somebody came along and plopped another little amount of that on. So it took me a little while to get the culture of this. But and this was southern India, and you eat with your hands, and how you do that with goopy food and not when you're not allowed to lick your elbows was another interesting question. But while we're doing this, there were these two little boys, maybe 10 years old, who were clearing table. And it was all you can eat for like all these different little piles of things. It was a thali, except for the one thing in a little dish in the middle, which was the dessert. And I understood that this was the dessert, and I was being an American, and I left it until last. But in India, you eat the sweet along with all the rest of the food. And these two little boys were standing in the corner like whispering, and they couldn't figure out who Tevian and I were to begin with. And Tevian had long hair, and there were a lot of cultural differences. But eventually, they just couldn't stand the fact that we were going to miss out on the best part of the meal. And they came up to us, and in their very best schoolboy English, they said to us, "That's the sweet." And to me, this is the model of how it is that you treat people who are not from your own culture. Make sure that they don't miss the sweet. So, I wanted to signal to you, I want to signal to you by starting out my talk sitting down. One of the things that I wanted to signal to you is that I am just one of you, and I'm amongst you. And so I want you to understand that most of the talk today is going to be about building community and what it means to build community in our workplace. But it is true that I have been honored and I am expected to give a lecture, and so I will come up here and stand up here and give the lecture. But as I give the lecture, I want you to know that I'm going to be talking about a number of different kinds of ways of engaging with students. And so you're hearing a lot about active engagement, and I want you to understand that when you're doing activities, the right-hand column is what happens. The students get to do things like focus on subtleties and experience the delight of discovering things. Activities are slow, but they're in depth. The students get to practice professional speaking and problem solving, all of which are things that are goals that we have for our students. On the other hand, I believe strongly that lecture still has its place. Still very strongly has its place. We should just do small versions of it. When you're lecturing, the instructor gets to paint the big picture and be inspiring. I hope I will be. And they get to cover lots fast, and I really hope I get to cover a lot fast because I have like 5 hours worth of things I want to share with you, and they're restricting me in time. But anyway, so I will mostly lecture today, but you'll also get a chance to practice some of the activities. The very first thing is, before you launch into any venture, you have to understand what its purpose is. Education is the single thing that everybody spends a big chunk of their life doing, and some of us spend our entire lives involved with it. And so we'd better understand what it is. So I would like you to, hopefully, you followed the instructions when you came in, and you were sitting with a group of 2 to 4 people, and you have a small whiteboard. And so your task is discuss with your group what is the purpose of education, and write 2 or 3 answers on your small whiteboard. And you have, the dean's introduction was embarrassing but long. You have like 2 minutes. Go.
Okay to put the other slide up now?
No, I would wait. If you have to, yeah, it's okay. What?
Blank the screen. If
Yeah,
you want.
blank the screen.
You'll have to unblank
No,
it.
then leave it up. You don't have a whiteboard? Okay. Okay, pause. So I'm going to pick on the Gilfillans. What's the purpose of education?
Help to learn something that will help you later on in life.
To help you learn something that will help you later on in life. Absolutely yes. Okay, that's a great one. Nan, do you have one?
No, well, mine is how to teach yourself.
Learning how to teach yourself is because you're not going to be in school forever. Okay, I'll take 2 more answers. Who's got an answer they want to share? Yes?
Facilitate cognitive growth.
Say it again.
Facilitate cognitive growth.
To facilitate cognitive growth, absolutely. One more. You know, I've only been doing this in the round once. Yes?
To grow and develop as a society.
To grow and develop as a society, absolutely. To teach future generations, absolutely. Okay? So, to contribute to society, to learn, to be able to make money, to be able to teach yourself later, all of these are important things. Some years ago, I read this description from an educational institution in rural Colombia. And their definition I've really taken to heart. It says the purpose of your education is both your growth as an individual and the development of your capacity to contribute to the transformation of society. This twofold purpose. And so often, I think we get lost in, you know, are my students really learning how to do flux? Or, you know, some other esoteric physics topic, and I forget about this. And when I remind myself what the purpose of education is, it helps me make choices about what it is that I'm going to do in the classroom. I love this picture of Dean Gilfillan. This is an active engagement classroom, right? He's having people come to the board and work on it. And it's a diverse group of people. I think that, and when I read about his life, I understood that for a while he was a high school physics teacher. And that he taught at many levels. He was very instrumental in starting a summer program for high school students called Jessie that encouraged those students to develop the skills that they needed to be successful in college. He was one of the originators of OMSI, understanding that science is a lifelong learning thing. He understood already back then in his life everything that I'm going to say to you tonight. And so I feel really honored that this talk follows in his tradition. What I want to do today, and the current dean already took like half my talk, which is good because that gives me more time to say other things, is I do want to tell you a little bit about the story of my life and what are the things that it influenced me. But these would have been very much in parallel with Dean Gilfillan's own life. And so it is true that I was a part of a big foment in terms of how education reform was supposed to happen throughout the 1960s and early 1970s. And so this is kind of a list of the things that I was a part of. I'm going to talk to you about only a couple of them. Oh, there's the list. And you can see the timeline there. First of all, I don't know whether you all got into the room in time to hear any of the videos that were going on, but one of them is about the new math, and I find it absolutely, it's a Tom Lehrer song, I find it absolutely hysterical, because this is the way other people do it, especially if you learned the new math, but the new math like came and disappeared, but I got to experience it and I loved it. And not only that, but the school that I that I studied in, from 1st through 3rd grade did new math. And then in the 4th grade, we moved to a new school and they were doing the old math. I was pretty lost for a year, but then they switched to the new math. And I knew more about the new math than my teachers did. And the power of being able to tell your teachers what these funny words mean and what these processes are, I think, was very influential in my becoming a teacher. But then I watched it fail. And the ways in which it failed and the reasons why it failed have very much informed how I think about trying not to let the paradigms fail. Okay? I was also part of the PSSC Physics, and you might have seen one of the videos from that. I learned a lot of things from that. It was a big physics reform movement done by famous physicists from big universities, the big powerful universities. It used a lot of new pedagogical strategies, open-ended laboratories and small group activities and the videos that you saw. I learned that modern physics is fascinating, but I also learned that physics is only done by middle-aged white men wearing narrow ties. And for me, I absorbed that message so deeply that it surprises me to this day when people say, "What do you do?" And I say, "I'm a physicist." Still to this day. In my last couple of years of high school, my high school built a new building. It was on the open space concept, so like the rooms all connected with each other and there were not hallways and it was noisy. And we had this thing called modular scheduling. So every day we had 21 periods and we were on a 6-day cycle, so that on the first week, you'd do day 1 on the Monday, and on the next week, the Monday was day 6, and then Tuesday would be day 1 again, and you had to keep like your schedule clipped to your notebook the whole year. And still to this day, I have nightmares that I completely forgot to go to one class, and that they were going to find out and take away my high school degree. So, but there were lots of things about that were great too. One of them was, the whole point was that students were supposed to be able to choose some about how they were going to spend their time. So that by the time we got to university, we already knew how to handle our lives in that way, and that was very true. It was also very encouraging to teachers. The teachers got to try new approaches in this way. And as you can see, I made up a schedule there, and it didn't end at lunch, it went on, but I just ran out of room on the slide. And so you would have some like 20-minute classes that were a short lecture, and then you had some things that were 3 mods long, so they were an hour long, which might be a group discussion, and you might have a lab, which was 4 or 5 or 6 mods long. And so the idea that you could chop up the time differently depending on what it was that you were doing became very natural to me. So, then it came time to do the paradigms in physics. And what was the paradigms in physics? People keep asking me, what is the paradigms? And the paradigms is so many different things. That's why I have 5 hours worth of stuff to talk to you about, right? So it was a restructured and rearranged curriculum, and you can see the courses there. Modular scheduling, right? I already knew how to do it. We featured lots of different kinds of active engagement, very much inspired by the PSSC. I like to include kinesthetic activities. Thank you, Mackenzie. The pictures are just too wonderful. These are students trying to figure out how quantum states change in time. And so I'm going to give all of you a chance to try, well, not all of you, some of you, a chance to try out an activity. So I need 10 volunteers. Come on. It's okay. Come on, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I need you all here. Yeah, no, I just need you like standing here. Come on, Casey. Come on, come on, come on. Come on, come on. I promise, like, not to embarrass you. That's part of the point. All right. Each of you, great. Each of you is a point charge. A point charge. You're a charge. So make for me a linear charge density.
Do we need to get in a line?
I think we need a line.
I think you need a line.
So it's kind of hard to do it here. Let's use
So
up here, right?
pause. What is
The
it?
tallest people should be at one end and the shorter people at the other, maybe.
Well, what is it that you're doing? You're having to parse the set of words and understand what it is that they mean. All right?
So it's
Linear charge density. Okay, you're all charges. Linear. Yeah. So in fact, linear just means, it could mean you're in a straight line. It could mean that the density varies linearly, but most people don't go there.
Short to high.
So it could be that, or in this case, linear means two different things. It's ambiguous in the English language. So sometimes it means varying linearly, but sometimes it just means one-dimensional. So you make a one-dimensional density, and you go like this, right? So you can be curved. It doesn't have to be a straight line, but you have to be arranged in one dimension. All right? Make me a constant linear charge density. What does the word constant mean?
The same.
About the same distance.
Yeah, so you want, so what I go into the classroom with my 2-meter stick. You know it's a physics department if you have 2-meter sticks instead of 1-meter sticks, right? And you say, I have here 4 charges per 2 meters, so that's 2 charges, or maybe 5. Ooh, 5 charges per 2 meters. And then do I have, if I move along here, do I have 5 charges per 2 meters? Okay, so I'm going to stop here, but this can go on, and you can do surface charge densities and volume charge densities and volume mass densities. And remember that in K-12 schools, students almost always deal with constant volume mass densities. So this other set of words is very unfamiliar, and I can quickly see who's understanding and who's not when we do these activities. Thank you all very much. You can sit down. The most important part of kinesthetic activities is that they keep students awake, right? You have to think about what is the pedagogical advantage of keeping students awake. All right. Let's actually go to the other screen. So this is, let me go back to it. This is what I experienced in my life. And it was interesting because when I was that UT Robert Little Physical Science, that was when I was in graduate school. I taught an active engagement class. And I arrived here at Oregon State, like thinking everything in the world was active engagement because that had been the experience I had. And I walked into a department that to me was very bizarre because everyone who had been hired, and this has been true throughout my career here, is truly, truly a dedicated teacher. And yet no one was doing active engagement. Everybody cared about teaching, but they didn't know all these things that I knew. So I took a deep breath and I kept doing my research and I raised a couple of kids and life was complicated. And then I went away on my first sabbatical and I came home and now, Devian, show the next. And so Ken Crane, who was the chair, said to me and a couple of other members in the committee, can you reorder our courses so that we could let our students be involved in a co-op program? So we said, okay. Janet was a part of this team. We said, okay, we can do that. And then we did it by sorting index cards with all the content on it so we could keep track of what it is that we were doing. And then Ken did the following very interesting thing. He said, once we had the cards out on the table, he said, if you could do anything you wanted, what would it be? Which was a really stupid thing to say to me. Right? And so the paradigms were born. I had total carte blanche to reform everything the way I grew up thinking education was supposed to be. So Janet and Phil Siemens and I sorted the cards and we came up with a plan and we shared it with the faculty. And it's the only vote, it's the only one of 2 votes by the physics faculty that I believe was unanimous in my whole time here. And if you want to know how to achieve a unanimous vote in your faculty, ask me about that one later. But Wei then said, oh, well, you know, this is a really big change. Maybe the NSF would fund it. And so we applied to the NSF, and the NSF was indeed willing to fund it. But they had like expectations about education reform because we were traditional research faculty. We didn't know anything about education reform. They said, oh, well, you need evaluators and an evaluation plan, and you need a big team. So this was the original paradigms team. And Maggie Neese, who was the chair of the Science and Math Education Department, was our external evaluator. And in the evaluation plan, the one thing I will share with you is she gave us lots and lots and lots of good advice. But the most important piece of advice was, she said, we had regular curriculum meetings, and that she said that was the most important thing what we did, and we have sustained those meetings every 3 weeks for 22 years. And that's a huge commitment by my department to thinking about what education looks like. So then, go on next. We got a new department chair, and we started encountering a lot of other difficult questions, like Henry says, what should the classroom space look like? What should classrooms look like? How do we support that? And we moved through a number of different classroom scenarios, and we had to get money from donors and from the university to build these classrooms, these active engagement classrooms, and we tried out a bunch of things. 20 years later, the university as a whole is finally catching up with that. I chose to have this talk in this room so that you could see the state of the art. I know that there are a lot of empty seats, and we decided we were going to face that because I wanted you to see this auditorium holds nearly 600 people, and I can walk up and down the aisles and interact with you. It's astonishing. This is not my preferred classroom environment, but because 600 people is like, it's really hard to have a relationship with like that many people. So anyway, we kept going back to the NSF for more money, and they kept saying things like, oh, do you have a dissemination plan? And we're like, what is dissemination? It's like, we're trying to hold things together here, and you want us to spread it out other places. But if we wanted funding, we were going to do that, and so that's what we did. And so this is now 22 years later. Why do we have this black band again, Devian? I don't know. So this is why this is not my favorite classroom thing, is the technology will always go. All right. Oh, good. All right. So now, 22 years later, I want you to see the whole number of people who were teaching faculty in the department, the number of people who are now physics education researchers. So then another thing that the NSF started expecting was that we were going to actually do research about our educational reforms and what does that look like. A whole long list of TAs and LAs and postdocs. And this is now the curriculum development team. These are the current faculty who are teaching in the Paradigms courses in this box in the lower middle part. And 1, 2, 4 of those are assistant professors this year. And we have a brand new chair. Where are you, Heidi? Whose question is, she comes from like outside of OSU, and I think her big question is, what are the paradigms? We're educating her tonight. So, one of the things that we've really found is important in terms of an active engagement classroom is using representations, and often tangible ones that people can touch, that help them understand what the physics or the geometry or the mathematics is behind what it is that they're trying to learn. And I hope some of you were able to play. We had both surfaces and partial derivatives machines out there and some other representations for you all to play with. Once we started actually trying to study how students learn, I personally became very invested in the question of representations. So what is the paradigm? So the paradigms is this, originally it was this big rearrangement of the content of the courses. But then it became a research-based curriculum. So we started doing things like doing our own education research to inform what we were doing in the classroom. What are the roles of different types of activities? How are students transferring their mathematics to their physics? How do experts understand this content? Which has turned out to be the biggest surprise to us. No two experts agree about how they think about the content. And so when we're trying to figure out what it is that we want the students to learn, if we can't even, like, our research group itself can't agree on the way we think about it, that's a big challenge. But we also look a lot at the research of others, and particularly research about, we don't do this research, but we use it, diversity and inclusivity and what that means in the classroom, and also the role of learning spaces. How do you design the space to support the kind of learning that you're doing? This bullet point called rich points, I'll explain in just a minute. So here's the current research team, and I'll give you just a minute to look at what some of their research questions are. So I think they're mostly sitting here. Say hello. And here are a few more questions. So now I'm going to teach you just a little bit of language. PER is physics education researchers. Physics education researchers are faculty whose expertise is in education research, but who are embedded in disciplinary departments. We're embedded in the disciplinary departments so that the students that we're studying are also the students that we're teaching, and the content that we're studying is also the content that we're teaching, so that there's this enormous synergy with what we do. The other word I want you to learn is DBER, which is discipline-based education research. So this is PER people in disciplines other than physics, right? So this is the general term. And one of the things that end stories of my talk today is I want to argue that the university needs more DBER faculty. And I want you to start understanding what the central role of DBER faculty is. And in particular, I think the important message here is that there's lots of research that goes on at the university, but it's research that improves society outside of the university. It improves other things. DBER research is the research that improves our own educational mission. And so to embed those faculty in the places where that activity is going on is an enormous win-win situation for the university. The scales of DBER run all the way from thinking about little individual cognitive elements that you want the students to understand, all the way to thinking about reform at the program or the institution level. Most of us sit around in sort of the group of students course, maybe down into the cognitive elements thing, but we also go to conferences where we're learning about the larger scale things, and we're also certainly implementing those in the Paradigms program here. This is a picture of the woods where I grew up. It's actually from online somewhere, but this is what it looks like this time of year in my home. And when I was young, my mother and my sister and I would go wildflowering at exactly this time of year, and it looked exactly like this. And the thing is that in this part of the world, the wildflowers there are tiny. This one in particular is called a spring beauty. And you would be walking along and there would be gullies that were not even as high as the ceiling here. And you'd be walking along and you'd think there's just a lot of dead leaves on the ground until your eyes would see one of a certain kind of flower. And then on this whole hillside, you'd look up the hillside and suddenly you'd see them everywhere. Do you actually see them at the foot of that tree now that you see them? My idea of research is something that Joe Reddish is now calling a rich point. The moment when you see something is going on in your classroom, either because you're using reflective practice in your classroom and you're actually talking to the students instead of talking at them, right? When you're using reflective practice and you notice they're thinking in some way that you never before noticed that students might think, then you say, oh, you know, that's not an unreasonable way to think. It's a perfectly reasonable way to think. And then my job as the faculty member is to figure out how to get to the students from this reasonable way that they're thinking that's, you know, like it's got one piece of it that's a little funny, or most often it's an overgeneralization, or a good generalization, but an overgeneralization of some result. How do you help them narrow it and shape it to something? And then what happens is, once you notice that, then you start seeing that lots of students are thinking in that same way. And I just never knew it before. So here's another word. It's called pedagogical content knowledge, PCK. PCK is what you learn about how students are interacting with the content and what they know. And so over the course of a lifetime, a teacher develops a whole lot of PCK. Now I understand this question of dissemination that the NSF wants us to address is how do we get the PCK that we accumulate as individual teachers in the classroom, how do we get that PCK out to other people? We've talked about learning spaces. All right, now I want to change a little bit because I want to take the focus off of me as a teacher and I want to start to think a little bit about the students. So I'm going to tell this story in the sense of my own cultural journey first, because it's always easiest for someone to talk about their own experience and then try to see how that plays out with other people. So as you've heard, I was a child of privilege, particularly educationally. In high school, I went to a wealthy public school in the Midwest. 98% of my colleagues went on to college. Right? Then I went to college, and I went to this liberal Eastern women's college, renowned for educating women scientists. And it was only there that I began to imagine that I could become a physicist. As a graduate school, I went to a large R1 public university in Texas, the University of Texas at Austin. As a postdoc, I went to an elite research institute, the Institute for Advanced Study, which is where Einstein was. And then as a faculty member, I came here and I was the first woman in physics at the department. I've had research opportunities and been able to give workshops abroad, so I've had a number of different cultural experiences that have broadened my viewpoint over time. But what are the lessons that I picked up? In high school, my parents and my school system told me that even as a woman, I could do anything I wanted, except they showed videos where all the physicists were the men in the narrow ties. In college, At this women's institution, all the physics faculty members were men. And they told me I could do physics, but only if I became a man. In terms of the toughness that I exhibited, in terms of the cultural way in which I interacted with my colleagues. In graduate school, I learned that women were sort of welcome in physics. And as a postdoc, I'd learned that actually women weren't very welcome. And not only that, but the culture was wildly cutthroat and competitive. Wildly so. I came to OSU, and what I learned was that women need special help to be allowed to get jobs in physics. My husband was hired, not me. I was a dual career hire, and it took Fred Horn and his wife with vision, and Ken Crane with vision, to say we need women faculty in this department. We will make a position for Corinne Manogue, even though her area of research is not particularly interesting to the department. And I am forever grateful, forever grateful. I learned teaching in this public university. I learned that so many things. The number of challenges my students faced were enormous. So many in the physics department, first-generation college students who don't understand like what the difference is between various kinds of degrees. People whose families did not support them being in physics. People who were challenged by the assumptions, not just of their gender, but of their race or their ethnicity. And the courage that those students have shown to me and the grace that they have shown to me has been an education for me, and I am forever grateful. So what happens? What happens when you make your classroom an active engagement classroom? Now, all of a sudden, the rules in the restaurant have changed. I'm expecting students to do things in the class with their colleagues. I'm expecting them to take risks about being publicly wrong. And that takes enormous courage. I'm going to share a story with you. There's a particular activity that we do that I love very much, but it puts a single student at risk. They have to come up and act out a little physics scenario from a graph with me. And I set it up deliberately so that I will convince that student to do something wrong publicly in front of their class, even when they know it's wrong. It's like a pretty interesting thing. And so I always pick a courageous and outgoing student to do this. And I think about it very carefully ahead of time because I don't want to intimidate somebody out of like ever coming to class again. And there was this one year where I forgot to think about it ahead of time. And I walked into the class and I'm getting ready, and then I go like, oh no, I haven't thought through. And so out of my mouth came the funniest words. I said, who's feeling brave today? Well, there was a young man in uniform in the class, right? He knows how you respond to that. I'm brave, right? He raises his hand like instantly to the point where I have to pick him, right? But he's the one student in the class who has never spoken aloud, never interacted with a group, never like totally. And I'm like, oh, this is going to be like one of the big disasters of my teaching career. But he came up, he did the activity, and after that, and he was publicly wrong, and he was okay with it, and after that, he completely changed. He participated in all the activities, he interacted with his group, he volunteered questions in class, because he had never thought that it took courage to participate actively in the class. And once it was defined in that way, he was like, okay, I can be courageous. I know what courage is, right? But we have to allow that. So what happens? What happens when someone doesn't believe that they're allowed because of their gender, which is what I experienced, or their race, or their whatever else there is about them. They don't think that they're allowed to be a physicist. Then it's a challenge for them. A year ago now, we went back to India, and I was asked to give a talk about women in physics. I'm like, well, I don't know anything about women in physics in India. I know about women in physics in the United States. So I'm searching online for everything. And I found the following wonderful picture, which these are women engineers who were part of the Indian Mars lander project at the moment that they successfully landed their lander on Mars. These were the women engineers in their traditional saris celebrating that success. The education research shows that if you have to do something intimidating, you should first go quietly into a bathroom by yourself and adopt a power pose. The most common power pose that's suggested is this one. But I suggest this one. So I will ask you all to stand up for a moment and adopt the power pose. And I hope that the photographer can get some pictures of us being powerful. Yes, thank you. So, what happened to my own personal identity? The choice I had about identity was, if I was going to be a physicist, I could be a man in a narrow tie, or I could be Einstein, or I could be Madame Curie, because that was the only woman physicist that anybody knows. There's this thing called the imposter syndrome that's sort of out there in the STEM fields generally, but in physics it's called the Curie syndrome. And the Curie syndrome goes like this. You, Corinne, can be a physicist, a woman physicist, as long as you're as good as Madame Curie, good enough to win 2 Nobel Prizes. So at any rate, I invite you, this is Tevin's and my wedding picture on the left, and picture of us now, and a picture of Einstein in the middle, and the picture of the PSSC physicist, so you can make your own judgments about where my identity went. You know, the wild gray hair is a giveaway. Okay. Now comes to me the most important part of my talk. This is for me a personal coming out of sorts. Because in the middle of all of my identities, I have felt welcomed at this university to share every one of them except my religion. Now, right now in modern society, talking about religion in a public institution is not, I mean, you know, people let me say a few things, but then they start to get like, oh, you know, you're crossing some boundary. Years ago, my mother was giving a talk at the Cincinnati Women's Club for a book club. And she wanted to read a passage from the book, and it had a 4-letter word in it. I think it might have been as bad as shit. And she's asking me, I'm in college, and she says, you know, well, do you think I can read this passage? And you know, when I grew up, women, if they were being proper, they wore hats and gloves. And I knew that the Cincinnati Women's Club was a place where my mom wore a hat and gloves. And it got, you know, this was now kind of the late 70s. The gloves had sort of disappeared, but the hats were still there. And my response to her was, if you wear a hat, you can say anything you want. So, I'm going to wear a hat. And for those of you who are women and over 50 and understand the reference, it's a red hat that clashes with the rest of my outfit. If you're not over 50 and a woman and know about red hats, then Google is your friend. Okay, but I'm a Baha'i. And that identity has infused throughout the Paradigms program everything that I have ever done. And yet, I don't get to talk to my colleagues about that inspiration until tonight. And I thank you all for letting me share a little bit of this tonight. So the first thing I want to share with you is that the Baha'is in Iran are seriously persecuted. The Baha'is in Iran have not been allowed to attend university since the Iranian Revolution in 1979. That's more than a generation of students who have been forbidden the opportunity that we have here. And to me, that's heartbreaking. And when you think about the need for distance education, let's get it done fast. They might have internet, right? And I'm going to share with you now, the talk has gotten pretty serious, and now all of a sudden, I sometimes feel like overwhelmed by the huge number of challenges that we face. We face political discord in our country. We face wars throughout the world. We face a climate which is changing. We face racial issues that are tearing our societies apart. We face all of these things, and so where is it that I should put my time and energy? And so I'm going to share with you this one quote from Baha'u'llah. It says, "The well-being of mankind, the well-being of mankind, its peace and security, which we all want. Its peace and security is unattainable unless and until its unity is firmly established. Nothing else is going to get fixed until we see ourselves as one people and we meet the needs of everyone." And so when I'm wondering where it is that I should place my time, it is towards unity. If this is contributing to unity, that's the first thing I have to do, and we'll worry about the rest of it later. And so that's where my talk is going with my red hat. The Baha'i Faith talks a lot about false dichotomies, the difference between men and women, the difference between science and religion, and the difference between white people and like the big everybody else. Right? And the Baha'i Faith says, think of all these false dichotomies as the two wings of a single bird. The bird cannot fly if one wing is not as powerful as the other. I have, yeah, I'm out of time. I'm stealing your time back. But thank you for the setup. I want to share with you this book, Beyond the Culture of Contest, which is a fabulous book. And I have one copy for the Gilfillan family.
Oh, okay.
Thank you very
I'll
much.
pass it
You can share. And one for the dean. This book was a really profound thing for me when I started to understand it. It talks about mutualism versus adversarialism. And the point of the book is that adversarialism has become normative in our culture. But it also talks about equality and inequality. So there are these two spectra. And when you think about these two things as lying along the same line, then you see only mutualism and equality as the same thing, and adversarialism and inequality is the same thing. And so I've given you some examples. Mutualism and equality is a good marriage. Thank you very much. Adversarialism and inequality is the very definition of, in extreme forms, coercion and oppression. But what this book talks about is recognizing that these two axes, all right, I'm talking about representations here, right? These two axes in physics and math, these two axes are not actually the same thing as each other. And when you do that, it opens up the space for other possibilities. So I want to know, talk with your group very quickly about what goes in the upper left when you have equality and adversarialism, and what goes in the lower right when you have mutualism and inequality. Talk, go. Do I want what?
You never put up the deeper slide with bigger than physics.
If I get to it at the end. Okay, pause. Pause. I'm over time, so I'm not going to collect any answers, but I want to tell you some of mine. Okay? Equality and adversarialism extreme leads to political gridlock. Equality and something somewhere between adversarialism and mutualism is good sports. But look at the lower right-hand corner. Mutualism and inequality is teaching and mentoring and parenting. Yeah. Why? That's where you live your life. That's where you live your life. That all of a sudden, when you open up these axes, these false dichotomies, when you start seeing it's because you're conflating things, when that opens up, it opens up space for you to see new possibilities that you never saw before. Okay, I've got like. Go real quickly. I spent like hours and hours doing these things. So this is like physics, but there's like one more. Is it not going to like, technology, there we go. Okay, physics is not the only department in the university that's doing these things, okay? But the only departments that I know about who have deeper faculty are mathematics and CBE, CCE, I think. I may get this, I don't want to offend anybody, but faculty who were hired to do education research and are embedded in disciplinary departments. Of course, there's the College of Education doing great research about education research, but I want you to see all of like the dotted line groups are places where a large number of faculty, and particularly this new group in our university, our long-term instructors, where they are starting to take a very scholarly approach to the work that they're doing. There's all kinds of, and I started to list them and then I ran out of time, but the Center for Research in Lifelong STEM Learning and the Integrated Learning Resource Center and the Academic Success Center and the library and all kinds of people here who are to support the educational mission. But what is needed is a new administrative framework that encourages the kinds of experiences that we've had in the paradigms. It encourages both individual initiative and collaboration. It employs a mutualistic consultative process. It uses cycles of growth, thinking about this organic growth of the educational system. It acknowledges that change is incredibly slow. But you can have change in many directions at once. And then the fact that any individual change is slow is dominated by this overall growth. And so I want you to see the role that Deber faculty play as catalyzers of this transformation. We have had enormous support from the institutions, and so I want to thank the institutions. What is the big picture? I hope what you've seen tonight is an organic process of growth, both my individual personal growth and the growth, the change in the department over 22 years. I hope you've seen the role that both individual and collaborative action have played in those things. I hope you've, well, I haven't talked as much as I wanted to about reflective practice, but stepping back and thinking about what progress have you made, what do you want to do next, comes from seeing the whole process as a long haul. We're not going to get there quickly. We're going to do it one step at a time, and so we're going to improve where we can, and then we're going to wait for times to get a little bit better in some other area and improve there. I hope you've seen the role of unity, diversity, respect, and culture in all of these endeavors. And so this is, nationally, it's incredible. All of a sudden, the NSF is saying, you know, like, we know active engagement works, go do it. Right? The resources are there. The university is primed. But what we need is some system that will pull us all together. My hope and my prayer, I'll wear my red hat, it's actually a prayer, for all of you, is the following. I hope that each one of you will go home and take some time to reflect about your own personal journey. The opportunity to prepare this talk and to think about what I wanted to share has been enormously growing and transformative for me. So I thank the Gilfillan family for that. But I hope all of you will go home and take, maybe not as long as I did, but some amount of time to think about your own personal journey. How has it affected who you are now? How has it enabled you to contribute to the transformation of society? Think about, what do you want to do next? What do you want to contribute to that? And how can you do that collaboratively? How can you invite others to walk this path with you? Thank you very much. 2 questions? You got it.
Thanks very much, Corinne. Thanks for a wonderful lecture. We have, I think we want to take a little bit of time, maybe for 2 questions. It's not a tremendous amount, but it's a little bit. So let's at least see if we can do that if anyone has any. If you just be brief in the interest of time, if you ask your question, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I taught in this classroom computational engineering. I want to have any, it's basically programming or computational thinking.
Yes.
So any advice or thoughts, how can I have active engagement in this setting for students who are just getting started with computational thinking?
So you should talk to my colleague David Roundy, who's over there, who does computational physics in the physics department. But he's experimented a lot with things called pair programming. So how you get students to work together in pairs, and has a lot of experience with how do you rotate them and how do you get them to report out and do that. So there's your expertise.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yes.
When you were thinking about active engagement and restructuring paradigms and just learning in general, how did you take into account the diverse backgrounds your students would be coming from?
So the question was, when I was thinking about doing this, how did I take into account the diverse backgrounds of my students? And I think the answer is that I didn't when I started.
Okay.
But what I found was that there's lots and lots of different kinds of active engagement, different strategies that you can do. But what they all have in common is that they increase the communication from the student to the faculty member. I trust that all of my fellow faculty members out there, you're actually pretty clever. If you know what's actually bothering the student, you will know what to do about it. The trick is to find out what it is that they're troubled with, right? And so my favorite activity, which I learned from my daughter's high school physics teacher, Pat Cannon, was to use these little whiteboards in class all the time. And particularly when I'm in the class and I'm looking out and I'm seeing the sea of like puzzled faces, I come up with a small whiteboard question that tries to get at what are the students understanding or not. And I think that the best way to handle diversity is to believe that all of your students are smart or they wouldn't be here. That they don't, well, I think all students are smarter than we think they are, but they know far less than we think they do coming to the university. And so if we can get at what they know and what they don't know, and to treat that with respect. You know, if y'all are young, You know, students are young, and if they don't know something, it's because they didn't have the opportunity to learn that thing, and it's our responsibility to give them that opportunity. So the more you just increase that, and the other thing is just, I think, as with all of our interactions with others, to be respectful is also the way to handle diversity. What has happened in my life is that often diverse people have shared stories with me that have helped me understand what I got to share my story tonight, but their stories. I was wondering whether I should tell this story, and I'm going to, because for me it was really profound. When I was in college, I had a good friend, another Baha'i, and she was black. And when my kids were somewhere in here, Tevin and I went to visit her family in Baltimore, and she had twins, 2 years old, and they were the most charming kids and loving family. And so we got to stay with them, and we met their family, and but her husband didn't know me and didn't know anything about me except that I was his wife's friend, which is some kind of an in. And he gave me one of the biggest gifts of my life by telling me the following story. He said that one of his daughters was playing in the kitchen, and there was a hot cup of coffee on the counter, and I don't even remember now whether he accidentally knocked it over or she knocked it over, but it spilled across her shoulder and burned her badly. And what he told me in this story was, he said, you know, I was a young parent. I had young kids. An accident that harms your child, that requires them taking them to the emergency room, is one of the scariest things that can happen to you. What he told me was he was afraid to take her to the hospital because he was afraid that he would be accused of child abuse. To not feel that this place, which was supposed to be the place of safety to take your children when they're injured, is not a safe place for you to go with your child when you're in that panic, I couldn't believe it. And to this day, to me, that story is the definition for me of what my privilege is and what other people go through. And so to be aware in the classroom that I have to make this space of learning, which I adore learning, and I adore sharing that learning with others. I have to make that a safe place for every one of the students in my classroom. It has to be, first and foremost, above any other thing, a safe place. And I learned that, not when I began, but from people whose background was different from mine, who were brave enough to share their stories. And that's a great place to end. Thank you. Okay.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you very much. Thanks to the Gilfillan family again. Thank you.